what I wanted to give you now is a brief introduction to Eklipse and how this conference has been initiated. And before I will introduce, of course, the web conference objectives, agenda, and process. But I thought it was a nice way to start with a bit of context. Next slide, Todd. So Eklipse is above all a vision. It's supposed to build a long-term sustainable mechanism to improve at the European level the interface between science and policy to ensure evidence-informed policy on biodiversity and ecology. It's of course implemented through a project that has been funded by the European Union. Next slide. Started in February 2016 and running for 4 years. But the idea is that, of course, this mechanism actually lives beyond the time of this project and implements some activities for the longer term. So how Eklipse works, next slide. One key aspect of Eklipse is actually to respond to requests coming from policymakers or civil society, and to respond to this request by selecting the ones that are relevant for our scope, so European relevancy, relevant for policy questions, and to provide some potential activities to answer those requests. Those activities can be knowledge synthesis, and you will see here some of the questions we received and selected that are currently being targeted and tackled by Eklipse. Some are already completed, for example, nature-based solutions, but we are also working right now on the agricultural European policy or on mental health and natural space. Another type of activities, so next slide, Todd, please, is to raise public awareness on some of the topics that, for example, policymakers or civil society has put forward in our request. And to engage society, we had some science cafes on the values of nature, for example, last year. Next slide, Todd. And of course, one of the types of activities that we propose is to identify research needs and emerging issues. And that's why we are here today and in the next couple of days, because one of the requests we received from Buglife was actually to tackle the idea of impacts of electromagnetic radiation on wildlife. And we propose to organize a large consultation on a virtual basis. I know it's a bit ironic to use wireless technology to talk about electromagnetic radiation, but somehow this is also maybe better in terms of footprint or CO2 emissions. So we're testing this format as well. Next, please. The way Eklipse works is also to mobilize all the existing networks to ensure that we have the adequate expertise, that we engage with knowledge holders from different communities. And biodiversity shouldn't be understood as something restricted. Biodiversity is more the cornerstone of a lot of environmental problems. So the communities we engage are actually quite wide, and we hope to use this network, this strong network, to be like an active force that we can trigger whenever needed by a request. Next slide, please. So if you want more information on Eklipse, because here I can only give you a little bit of information, you can look at our website. We also have a forum for discussion. And you can also, of course, contact us or follow us on Twitter, where we post a lot of news and items. So thanks a lot for this attention on this Eklipse project. I would like now maybe if Matt Shardlow is available online. I don't know, Todd, if you have Matt in our participants.
Hi there, Estelle, I'm here.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Matt, for joining us to give this brief introduction maybe to how you decided to put on this request to Eklipse.
Sure. So next slide. So Buglife's a charity, non-governmental organisation, and our aim is to stop the extinction of invertebrate species and achieve sustainable populations of invertebrates. We do lots of things to achieve that, and we're trying to address specifically declines and extinctions. So next slide. This is just a graph that you'll be familiar with probably from this summer of German nature reserves showing a 75% decline in abundance of invertebrate life flying around in those reserves. And this is, part of a broader pattern of disappearing insect life. The fact that it's happening in nature reserves indicates that there must be something fairly broad scale happening to our countryside for us to see these declines. It's almost certain there isn't one cause of declines. In fact, we're certain there isn't one cause of declines. There's all sorts of issues here with climate change, fragmented habitats, pesticides, land management, all of these interplaying to contribute to invertebrate declines. Next slide. Some of the issues that we tackle in Buglife are to do with how humans are impacting on the natural environment. We've done a lot of work, for instance, on light pollution, raising concerns about how moths, nocturnal invertebrates, can be badly affected by light pollution. So we're aware of the sort of policy dimensions that need to be brought into play when you're tackling these sort of broad-scale societal impacts that we're having. One of the impacts that has frequently been raised with us, next slide, is electromagnetic radiation coming from a variety of sources. Could this be causing declines or affecting invertebrates in the countryside? Well, there hasn't been a vast amount of sort of widely available data and scientific studies. Bits and pieces of information, a few studies here and there, very disjointed field, and very difficult to assess because unlike light pollution that we can see and we can start to feel how that might impact on other life, most of this electromagnetic relationship, we can't sense it or feel it in any way. So if there are invertebrates out there sensing it and feeling it and responding to it and reacting to it and being affected by it, we won't be able to tell because we can't see that happening. So we really wanted to shine a light on this, and we flagged this up as a really useful subject for Eklipse to look at. And what sort of Buglife wants to get out of this is obviously to understand how worried we should be about electromagnetic radiation and its impacts on wildlife. And that should give us a stronger foundation either to call for policy change or to get the detailed research we need done to make sure that we're addressing any environmental impacts from electromagnetic radiation.
Well, thanks a lot, Todd. Indeed, when Eklipse received this request, first of all, we thought it would be quite interesting to look at this in terms of emerging issues, but also we thought it would be nice to extend the scope to more than just invertebrates. So that's actually what the conference will do by looking at also flora, plants, and vertebrates. Next slide, please, Todd. So I would like to recall the objectives of the web conference. Of course, we have first to discuss a current state of the art, the current state of knowledge. And for that, I will give more details, but we have sent you a background document that was developed by our wonderful steering group, gathering some experts from ecology, biology, and technical aspects. And then from this state of the art, the idea is to identify together knowledge gaps and to build from these knowledge gaps some priorities in terms of the research that would be needed to fill in those gaps and to address science policy and funders. And finally, based on the findings in the existing research, in the current state of knowledge, what could be potential recommendations to be tackled or sent to policymakers, either in the environmental field or in other sectors. So I would like also to give you a bit of framing, because in this web conference, we would like to focus on wildlife, fauna and flora, but we strongly would like to make sure we let the human health impacts on the side a little bit, because there has been some research on this aspect, but it's not included in this conference. Also, the fact that we are not including much research on domestic animals. We would like to focus on wildlife. And finally, as mentioned by Matt, the EMR range that will be that has been included in the background document and will be looked at in this conference is actually not including light.